Ladies, gentlemen, all those outside and in between, welcome to another episode of RenFare, a podcast dedicated to psychoanalyzing and critiquing media. I am your host, Connor Renfro, one half of From the Margins. Listen until the end for more ways to hear me and support the project. Season 5 has a different structure from previous seasons. Rather than having a 12-episode arc,
or two 12-episode arcs like Season 3,
5 possessed a single arc spread over 20 episodes, split into two groups of 10. Before we get too deep into that, let's talk about story structure. Structuralism, as a theoretical framework, is super complicated and hard to wrap one's mind around.
kind of like Teen Wolf's 5th season.
Instead of lecturing about the theory, I'll just give examples of the praxis. If you had a literature class in high school or even a creative writing class, you're probably familiar with the idea of story structure. It's that line graph that maps the action of the plot, from introduction to rising action to climax to denouement to resolution. Structuralists like to make charts and formulas out of art. A regular 12-episode season of Teen Wolf had a story arc that could be plotted along that line graph, but so could each episode, and even each scene. And when the rising tensions and thematic currents of several different storylines coalesced, the season was super awesome. It had a sound structure. The other part of structuralism is the study of semiotics, or of signs and symbols and what they represent. Ferdinand de Saussure gave us the iconic equation sign equals signifier plus signified. A signifier is something you see, and the concept it calls to mind is what it signifies. Say you're walking down the street and you pass a storefront with the word open on the door. The word open on its own doesn't mean anything, but in the context of its placement, you understand that the store is operating. It's open for business. Or you could get into an elevator, and as the doors start to shut, you see your friend running toward you. There's a button on the control panel that says open. That signifier has a completely different signified. And now I want to touch on formalism, which is somewhat different. Formalism is what you did in AP English literature when you did a close reading of a text, looking for figurative language or the use of symbolic imagery. Blue curtains mean sad, yellow car means money, black bird means death. The two schools can be similar, but formalism is about looking at one piece of art completely devoid of context. We are reading the book only for the book, not thinking about when it was written, or by whom, or how the culture of that time shaped it. Structuralism would care about all of those things, and would view the book in question as it is in conversation with the culture that created it. Formalists went out of vogue, but many of their practices were adopted by the new critics, who championed the close reading of texts. That's digging deep into a single scene, trying to parse as much meaning as possible. That's how you get entire dissertations from a single line of Shakespearean dialogue. I've been using elements of structuralism and new criticism in my critique so far, like when I identified the word anima in Canema, decided it was a reflection of Jackson's toxic masculinity, and then created a psychoanalytic reading of that. But I have always tied my critiques back to cultural discourse, queer theory, feminist theory, race and Marxist theory, etc. For this episode, I'm going to try to read 5A only using the text of the show. I'll be looking for signifiers and their signifieds, and the rules put forward by the show itself. No hot takes this time, just structural analysis. Here we go. We open with Lydia in Eichenhaus, doing karate and using her banshee scream to fight off security guards. What? Then we cut to the present, where everyone is preparing for their senior year.
Interesting tactic.
Styles is afraid that he's going to lose his high school friends when they all go to college. Losing your friends is a huge conflict this season. Scott is worried that Kira was hooking up with other guys over the summer in New York because he told her to have fun.
Ooh, here's our first sign.
So Scott told Kira to have fun, and now he's worried that he might have signified the wrong thing to her. He's worried that he signaled that they weren't serious or that he wasn't committed to her and that she should have fun by exploring her sexuality.
So they reunite in the middle of traffic in a heavy downpour, and he gets off his motorcycle and runs up to her and he says,
"Did you have fun in New York?"
and she looks at him and she says, "Not really." And he says,
"Good."
and then they passionately kiss while the music swells.
Best scene in the entire series.
And then we see this werewolf named Belasco, and he is hunting Scott down. So they get into this fight, and Scott and Kira are able to beat him with the help of another werewolf. This guy is named Theo. Turns out he's an old friend of Scott and Styles from the 4th grade, but he moved away. His actor is Cody Christian, who is just
ungodly beautiful.
So apparently Theo has come back to Beacon Hills to join Scott's pack. Near the end of the episode, Belasco goes back to his masters, the Dread Doctors, and they execute him. Apparently they sent him to track down Scott and he failed, and they say they don't give second chances. All of the seniors break into the new library to graffiti their names on the shelf. So this day is called Senior Scribe. It's literally leaving a sign that you were there. So Styles pointedly notices Derek's initials on the shelf. When it's Malia's turn, she struggles to decide what her last initial is, and she settles on T for Tate. This signifies her character conflict for the season. Is she really a Hale? Is she really Peter's daughter? And when it's Scott's turn, he takes a second, and then he adds Allison's initials underneath his own. AA. The show is taking a moment to remember the legacy of its former stars.
We will always live in the shadow of Allison Argent. Rest in peace. She should have been there.
Then we go back to our flash forward with Lydia in the Eichen house, and she's being questioned by this man named Dr. Valak. We actually met him last season, but I didn't talk about him. He has this third eye in his forehead that lets him see special things, I guess. I'm not really sure. And he's interrogating her about the events that lead up to her moment in the hospital, or in the Eichen house, in the sanitarium. And she tells him that all of her friends are going to die. Then we see a lot of scenes completely devoid of their context. Scott and Liam fighting.
If you remember, Liam is the new beta that Scott made in the previous season.
Then we see Melissa, Scott's mom, slapping the sheriff, Styles' dad.
What could it mean?
We see Kira sadly getting into a car and leaving Beacon Hills. Deputy Jordan Parrish, his eyes burning orange, flames surrounding his body.
We know that he's supernatural, but we don't know what he is.
Then we see Malia cowering in fear as a shadow approaches her. Styles, his Jeep overturned, the boy himself unconscious, and we're worried for his safety. And at the end of all of that, Dr. Valak takes a drill out and tells Lydia he's going to give her a trepanation. He's going to drill a hole into her forehead, perhaps to uncover her third eye. Maybe having a third eye is a banshee thing. We don't really know yet. So then we go back to the present for our second episode. We have Dr. Deaton, Scott's boss, and Druid informing our heroes that Belasco, the werewolf from the premiere, his special blue claws are actually harpy talons that have the ability to steal power from other people. But how could a werewolf have harpy talons? Someone is trying to change the rules of the supernatural world. Styles is trying to investigate Theo. He's convinced that Theo is up to no good. He's not buying that he would suddenly return right now. In one scene, Styles uses handwriting analysis to deduce that Theo's dad is fake.
Many years ago, Theo's dad was in the hospital for some reason, and he left his signature on an intake form, and then Styles pulled the more recent transfer forms for Theo coming to their high school and realized that his dad used a different signature.
Here, handwriting is a signifier of identity. So Styles is convinced that because Theo has a different dad now, he's evil and malicious. But Malia points out to him that parents shouldn't be used to signify their children. You know, for example, her dad is Peter. Her mom is the Desert Wolf. We don't really know that much about the Desert Wolf, but we can assume that she's bad news. Is Malia bad news just because both of her parents are probably villains? So Liam pulls his friend Mason aside and tells him all about the supernatural and reveals that he's a werewolf. Probably Mason already knew because he was fighting berserkers in the previous season. They just had to bring him into the fold so they could have the rest of this plot make sense. Then Lydia and Parrish try to help this girl named Tracy, who's been suffering from hallucinations and night terrors. Her bedroom ceiling is covered in scratches. Her roof is covered in dead blackbirds. And we know that blackbirds are common death symbols, and that claw marks in this show have historically represented the presence of shapeshifters. So Tracy, in her little sleepwalker trance, wanders into the lair of the doctors, and they inject her with this serum, and then she turns into a werewolf. So doctors can turn humans into shapeshifters without magic? Are we seeing an intersection now between science and magic?
At the risk of undermining the conceit of this episode, I do want to pull in a quote that comes to mind. Magic is just science we don't understand yet. Like everything has rules to it. What we think of as magic could be scientific.
After her injection, Tracy goes on a killing spree. Liam discovers that she was buried alive in the woods and dug her way out of the ground. This will be an important signifier for later. Scott, Stiles, and Malia bring an unconscious Tracy to Deaton at the vet clinic. Tracy regains consciousness and then grows a tail because she's actually part Kanima.
Okay, so I thought Kanima, as a thing, only occurred in evil people. That's how they explain Jackson. Can someone be two different creatures at once? Because in season 2, they had to excise the Kanima from Jackson before he could become a werewolf. Wow, really bold of me to do an episode about rules in a season all about breaking rules.
After paralyzing everybody, Tracy then easily walks out of the mountain ash barrier they placed around her and escapes the clinic. So we know that a mountain ash circle is supposed to be a ward against magic. Supernatural creatures can't pass through it. Therefore, Tracy is not magic, which could explain her hybridity. So continuing her killing spree, Tracy then goes after Lydia's mother. And they have this showdown in the police station where Kira unleashes her kitsune powers and does all these epic katana moves and cuts off Tracy's tail and then gets paralyzed. And Lydia also sustains a major injury during this debacle. But it's ultimately Malia who manages to defeat and subdue Tracy. But then the doctors phase through the wall and give Tracy a lethal injection and she dies. Then we get kind of a flashback dream sequence of Parrish and Lydia together. Parrish is holding a playing card, the Queen of Hearts, but the Queen has Lydia's face.
Now, is this a sign that Jordan is in love with, a high schooler? That's disgusting.
But this dream of Lydia also triggers some kind of fugue state in him. We see Parrish carrying a dead body to the Nematon, and then his body just combusts into flames. Back in the present, the doctors abduct this punk named Donovan who has been threatening the sheriff's life. And while they operate on him in their evil lair, we see that Theo is present. Theo is actually working with these mysterious doctors. Stiles was right not to trust him. Then we're in Stiles' bedroom, and Malia's there, and she is looking at his marker board where he tracks all of the clues of whatever case he's working on, and she sees that Desert Wolf with a question mark is written in big letters. And Malia makes a point of erasing that while Stiles watches, signifying, or at least how I interpret it, stay out of my business. Malia has mommy and daddy issues, and she does not want her boyfriend digging into it. Then Lydia undergoes surgery in the hospital for that injury she sustained in the Tracy fight, and she realizes that,
I can't really defend myself like all of my friends can.
So she asks Parrish to teach her how to fight.
Teach me how to defend myself.
So Deaton informs Scott that Belasco was a werewolf-Garuda hybrid, and Tracy was a werewolf-Kanima hybrid. We already knew about Tracy, but what's the deal with Belasco? A Garuda is a legendary birdman. He is the king of the birds in Hindu and Jain mythology. It's a single deity, not a class of creature.
But I guess Final Fantasy XII had a tribe of Garuda, so Teen Wolf is hardly the first fantasy property to do that.
So this implies that somebody is creating hybrid supernatural creatures, or chimeras. In Greek mythology, the chimera was a lion-goat-snake creature that Bellerophon had to kill. But in genetics, a chimera is a single person with 2 unique sets of DNA.
And I had just learned about genetic chimerism in my biology lecture the semester before this aired, so I thought that was pretty neat.
Now we're at some nightclub. So Liam is arguing with this girl named Hayden. They have like some past beef. She's going to become an important character later. But yeah, these high schoolers are just at a nightclub. Mason is there, and he starts getting hit on by this dude named Lucas. And it turns out that Lucas is a chimera who has like these poisonous spikes all over his body. I feel like he's a were-scorpion or something. So then a fight breaks out and everybody's able to fend Lucas off. And Kira decides she's going to kill him, but Scott stops her. So now Kira is the one who has control issues. And after they defeat Lucas, the doctors appear and just kill him themselves. And they drop the line, "Condition terminal." So the doctors are killing off their failed experiments. They're creating these supernatural creatures artificially, and when they don't work, the doctors just give them a lethal injection. And then Parrish, in a trance, takes Lucas's body to the Nematon, and, well, Parrish catches on fire, so Lucas also burns. Back at the high school, Styles gets attacked by Donovan, that punk guy who wanted to kill his father earlier. Now, Donovan has been transformed into a Wendigo lamprey hybrid.
And a lamprey is literally just an eel. I mean, there are monsters in folklore based on them, but the way this works is that Donovan just has like a second mouth in his hand that looks really painful, I guess.
So he attacks Styles and chases him into the library, and then Styles accidentally kills Donovan in self-defense. So Styles has just taken a person's life. Very heavy. Parrish steals Tracy and Donovan's bodies out of whatever hospital morgue they're in. That night, Scott and Kira are in bed, and Scott wakes up and he hears Kira whispering Japanese in her sleep. She also spoke Japanese right before trying to kill Lucas in the nightclub earlier, and according to Scott, Kira doesn't know Japanese. She can't speak it, so why is she whispering it in her sleep? On another occasion, Kira asks Scott to look at her through his alpha eyes. So when he did that in 3B, he saw this like super buff fox aura around her. But when he does it now, that fox is now massive and angry, and it's like flames going everywhere. So is this image connected to Kira's recent killer streak? Has the kitsune inside her changed? Malia discovers a book called The Dread Doctors. It looks just like some pulpy novel that might have been published in the 50s. She shows it to the others, and when Scott looks at the dedication page, he sees it's dedicated to Dr. Valak, the three-eyed doctor at Eichen House. He's an inmate. He doesn't work there. He's like interned there. So the team decide they're going to go to Eichen House. Malia doesn't go, but the rest of them do. So as they try to enter, Scott and Kira realize they can't go into the supernatural wing.
Alright, so Eichen House, this was revealed in Season 4, and I neglected to tell you, but on one hand, yes, it's an insane asylum, and on the other hand, it's also kind of like a prison for supernatural creatures secretly. And the supernatural wing of this institution, Scott and Kira can't go through it because the walls are lined with mountain ash. Also, Eichen was built on a telluric current, electromagnetic waves that travel through the land, and they hinder magic and supernatural creatures. So it was like built for the purpose of housing supernatural creatures who couldn't be controlled.
So it's only Styles and Lydia who can question Valak. As a banshee, Lydia doesn't actually have to adhere to the mountain ash things. So Valak reveals that he wrote the book, the Dread Doctor's book, to chronicle what happened the last time the doctors appeared. But reading the book will also unlock memories that the doctors have manipulated. So these dread doctors have an ability to manipulate your memory, and reading the text of the book is able to help your brain remember or undo the manipulation the doctors have done to it. So the way the language on the page interplays with the information processing in your brain is meant to stimulate part of your unconscious, which is super neat because that was always the magic of literature. You have an idea, translated through language, which itself is just sound signified by letters, translated back to an idea in a reader's mind. So like, you're thinking of a tree, you write the letters T-R-E-E, somebody else reads that word and they get an image of a tree in their brain, right?
That's structuralism, baby. That's semiotics.
The problem is, Kira's electric powers go haywire, which disrupt the supernatural security system. Apparently, the doctors planted the book, hoping that the team would find it and go to question Valak and bring Kira with them, because as a kitsune, her electric body would interact with the telluric currents and disable the protections. So the doctors are now able to enter the asylum, and they remove Valak's third eye from his forehead. Afterwards, Valak uses a recording of Lydia's banshee scream to shatter the glass wall of his cell, and he's able to escape Eichenhaus. While all of this is going on, Malia is driving somewhere with Theo, and she has this flashback to the desert wolf trying to shoot at her mom's car all those years ago when the accident happened. So it's the desert wolf, her mother, that caused the car crash that killed her adopted mother and sister. This is completely rewriting the narrative around Malia. She's not the one who killed her mother and sister, her biological mom did. And being attacked by the desert wolf is what really made Malia turn into the coyote. Sheriff Stilinski discovers 8 large holes on the lacrosse field. This signifies that the Dread Doctors have created 8 new chimeras. So Parrish begins teaching Lydia how to fight, and remember the last time a man and a woman were learning how to fight together? Yeah. So Scott's pack read Valak's book together, but Kira has difficulty reading it. And it turns out that kitsune are confused by language tricks. You have to outfox the fox. Everybody falls asleep while reading except Theo, and Theo sees Kira sleeping and whispering, and he records her. And then later he translates it and tells Scott that what she's saying is,
I am the messenger of death.
I thought that was Lydia's job. Well, the next day at school, Scott has an asthma attack. He's not supposed to have those after turning into a werewolf. Basically, Scott, Stiles, and Lydia are all experiencing traumatic visions because of their exposure to the book.
Jeff Davis loves his hallucinations.
But really, these are actually more like repressed memories. Remember when Malia had that flashback to her mom shooting at the car? That was actually because of the book. So now Lydia recalls a scene of her grandmother all those years ago who had this episode where she's screaming, "They're coming for us," possibly meaning the doctors. And Stiles, he's having a hallucination that causes him to walk to the roof of the hospital building. He sees his mother at the worst of her dementia, and she's convinced that Stiles is some kind of demon that's trying to kill her. That's like a real episode she had when he was a kid, and he internalized that even though he repressed it.
And you know, it reminds me of season 2 when he drank the wolfsbane laced punch at Lydia's Sweet 16, and he saw that vision of his father saying, "You killed your mother." I mean, this is a lot for like a young child to handle. Ugh! This show just puts too much on Stiles. Poor Stiles. Oh, my baby.
Well, while Stiles is on the roof, this new chimera named Josh, who's some kind of lightning eater or electricity eater, he's also on the roof of the hospital, so he attacks Stiles, but Theo saves him and kills Josh. And then they're like, "Oops, that's a murder." And Theo's like,
Stiles, please don't tell Scott about this, especially since I saw you kill Donovan.
So apparently Theo was there at the library and saw Stiles kill Donovan.
I mean, that's not much of a surprise, because Theo's working with the Dread Doctors.
Which I guess leads me to believe that Theo knew Josh was going to attack Stiles this night, and killing Josh tonight was part of Theo's ongoing plan.
But here's the really interesting thing. When Theo kills Josh, his eyes stay yellow. They don't turn blue. Now, when I watched this for the first time back in 2015, 2015, I didn't question it. And then I rewatched it this year. I mean, I noticed it and I thought, oh, well, you know, your eyes only turn blue if you kill an innocent person. So maybe Josh isn't innocent. But
in anticipation for this episode, I did watch some recaps so that I wouldn't have to actually rewatch the whole season.
And the commentator that I was watching said that Theo's eyes don't turn blue because Theo isn't a real werewolf. He's not a biological werewolf. That's the reason his eyes stay yellow. These are the rules of the show that we have to consider. So Hayden, that one girl from the nightclub that Liam has a past with, she gets attacked by the doctors, and Liam shows up to rescue her. But after that attack, she transforms into a werewolf.
So I guess she's a chimera too.
And then Mason, Liam's friend, befriends this one dude named Corey, who is actually the ex-boyfriend of Lucas, the were-scorpion that was hitting on Mason at the nightclub. And then that Corey dude is actually a chimera as well. So Corey can turn invisible.
But I can't give you a hot take about it because that's not the conceit of this episode. So you'll just have to take for granted that you can turn invisible.
Well, Kira goes to her mother, Noshiko, and tells her all about her struggles. And Noshiko warns her that the inner fox is fighting Kira for control. I take this to mean that Kira's relationship with the fox is very different from, say, Scott's relationship with his wolf.
So it was either episode 1 or 2, but I made this point about the wolf has a separate consciousness inside of the shapeshifter. I think I think it was episode 2 when Derek did an alpha roar at Isaac and Isaac submitted. So that showed that the wolf part of Isaac recognized the wolf part of Derek, and it might have been like a separate consciousness, perhaps. But now I think it's really more akin to like the relationship between the ego and the id. So I'm not going to bring Freudian psychoanalysis into this, but perhaps it is the case that a werewolf has like their regular human side, but they also have animalistic tendencies within them that are brought out by the full moon and can be exacerbated by external influences. Those are things we've seen in the show, right? That's what happened to Scott. That's what happens to Liam. Liam has anger issues that excite the wolf inside of him. So we have that happening with the werewolves.
The fox inside of Kira is a completely separate entity, and that entity grants her power. Like, she can draw upon the kitsune, the fox spirit inside of her, to give her like superhuman gymnastic abilities and electricity powers and katana fighting skills. But it is actually just a different identity. So if Scott were to lose control, his own animal instincts would take over. His anger, his rage, his bloodlust, his primitive side would take over, and he would just enact the carnage that's inherent in the human. When Kira loses control, that's actually a completely different identity assuming control of the body and using that body, piloting that body with an informed agenda. So Melissa McCall, that's Scott's mom, who's a nurse who works at the hospital, and Sheriff Stilinski, Stiles' dad, they discover that the chimeras had all previously received either organ transplants or skin grafts.
So that's not the same thing as genetic chimerism, but in a way it's meant to explain how these people have two sets of DNA. Real genetic chimerism is more like a woman is pregnant with twins, with fraternal twins, but the two embryos fuse into one. So they both have two separate DNAs, but then they end up fusing into a single person with two DNAs. So that's what genetic chimerism is. Getting an organ transplant or a skin graft. I mean, yeah, you're going to have like an alien or foreign thing in your body, but that's not the same thing. I don't really know how prevalent genetic chimerism is. I'm led to believe it's quite rare, so Jeff Davis, operating under the same assumptions, probably believed, oh, well, we need a reason to show that like a ton of people have two sets of DNA in them. And it really seems like each set of DNA is forming its own creature. That's what I think is happening. So Tracy, for instance, she gets an organ transplant. So she has her original set of DNA, and then she gets the DNA from that new organ planted inside of her. Her original DNA is a werewolf, but the DNA in that other organ expresses Kanema traits. Again, that should not happen biologically, but wait, why am I even trying to explain this, right? It's an MTV show. I guess we're just going to throw out Derek's theory about the shape you take depends more on psychology than biology.
This is torture.
Theo and Stiles stake out the vet clinic to find out who is stealing the dead chimeras. Remember, Theo is working with the Dread Doctors, and so he's just as curious about who's stealing the failed experiments and where do they end up. Meanwhile, Scott, Lydia, Malia, Liam, and Parrish, basically everybody else, they are in the high school setting up a trap. They want to protect Hayden, but also capture one of the doctors. They're using frequency jammers because they discovered that the doctors aren't completely corporeal. They travel on electromagnetic waves, which makes me think of broadcasting. The doctors are simply information that is being broadcast, and our heroes are trying to stop them by interrupting the broadcast, by jamming the frequency. They don't include Kira in their plan because they're scared of her. Cut to Kira at her house, and she disappears. Her parents lose her. At the high school, Parrish slips into another trance after seeing a vision of Lydia.
Lydia is a banshee who can see death. Dreams or visions of Lydia trigger Parrish's fugue states. Lydia also has fugue states when she goes out and finds bodies. So Parrish is something similar to a banshee, or he is at least connected to death. It is really hard drawing conclusions using only the text.
I just want to bring in every other framework.
So Parrish abandons his post at the high school and goes to the vet clinic, and he knocks Styles and Theo unconscious. He flips the Jeep. That's actually the scene we saw at the beginning of Styles unconscious in his Jeep. And he steals Josh's body. Meanwhile, back at the high school, the doctors are able to enter and abduct Liam and Hayden with no problem. So much for that plan. The doctors used hallucinations,
Of course.
to incapacitate the pack. So Scott gets separated from everybody else, and he thinks he sees Kira show up, and then she stabs him with her katana. So obviously, Scott is worried about what's happening to Kira. Malia, when she has her hallucination, gets caught in a coyote trap. So on one hand, that is a fate she almost met when we were introduced to her. On the other hand, her mom's a coyote,
Her mom is the coyote.
The desert wolf.
and we know that that mom is now after Malia. She did try to kill her all those years ago. And for Lydia, she sees Tracy come back and tear out her tongue. So Lydia is still traumatized over the helplessness she felt when Tracy tried to kill her mom all those episodes earlier. Lydia's power comes from her scream, but Tracy removed her tongue, which was her power. So that's the high school episode. Liam and Hayden got kidnapped. And then Melissa comes home from a long day of work at the hospital, and what do you know? There's a dead chimera on her kitchen table, impaled by Kira's katana.
Kind of like a cat leaving a dead animal for its human as a gift.
Deaton ventures off to investigate the doctors, but he runs into the desert wolf, and she tells him she's coming back to finish Malia off. So Kira gets arrested for the murder of that one chimera girl on Melissa's dinner table. But her father confesses to the crime. He wants to protect his daughter and his wife. He wants to protect the existence of Kitsune. And so then we see the scene where Melissa slaps the sheriff because the sheriff is putting the law above the safety of the supernatural kids. Scott is desperate to get Liam back. He uses his Alpha Claw memory technique to look into Corey's memories and learn where the doctors are. And he sees that the doctors did their experiments on Corey in some kind of water plant. Then we see where Liam and Hayden actually are, which is in some kind of like place, some kind of yard. They're behind like a fence. And there's a dude there named Zach who used to have wings, but they've been amputated. And he explains to them that the doctors kill their failed chimeras when they start bleeding mercury. So mercury is the signifier of failure. Then the doctors drag Zach out and kill him. So he was just there to provide exposition. So Theo reveals that Liam and Hayden are being held in the abandoned house where Belasco first appeared.
I don't really remember how he pretends to discover this because, as we know, Theo, working with the doctors, actually knows where they are, right?
So they rescue Liam and Hayden. They get them out of wherever they are. And then Liam and Hayden decide whatever rocky past is behind us, let's just become a couple. Yay.
Love wins always.
Noshiko tells Kira, why don't you read the book backwards?
If you can't read it left to right, if that confuses the kitsune, just read it backwards. You're still getting all the same words.
I don't know, maybe that works. Well, I mean, I know it works. It works for Kira. She reads the book backwards, and she then remembers that the doctors experimented on her that first episode, the very night she came back to Beacon Hills. When she first got out of her car during the thunderstorm, a doctor appeared and injected something in her neck. Now we know that the doctors are responsible for the fox inside of her acting up. Parrish goes into another trance and he steals that one Chimera girl's body. And so now the sheriff's station is left with no body, no case. They have to let Kira's dad go. So then the Yukimuras decide they're just going to leave Beacon Hills because this is just too much for them. And Kira tells Scott that she's leaving with them because
I don't know what the doctors did to me, but, I'm scared of who I am now. The fox inside of me is murdering people, so let me peace out.
So Scott is still struggling with his asthma. It seems like it's really returned. Theo asks the doctors to leave Hayden alive. So is Theo actually a good guy? Could he have a conscience? Oh well. Hayden begins bleeding mercury.
Hayden and Liam were actually kissing before that happened, and the way that their kiss scene was framed was exactly the same as season 1 Scott and Allison. So it's all repeating.
The only difference is Liam and Hayden actually look like high schoolers instead of people in their 30s.
And while Hayden is bleeding mercury, the other dude, Corey, is vomiting blood and mercury. And so he gets taken to the hospital. Then he tries to escape from the hospital, but the doctors kill him. And seeing Corey's fate, Liam and Hayden decide they're just going to go on the run.
We don't care about Pac. We don't care about anything. We're in love, and we're just going to run away, and the doctors can't kill Hayden that way.
But the doctors do, they come back.
They're magic or scientific, or they travel on electromagnetic waves and they hunt them down.
But Scott and Theo show up to save them and they all fight, but it doesn't matter because the third doctor gives Hayden some kind of injection, but it doesn't kill her. Now Theo tells Scott that Stiles killed Donovan, but he leaves out the part where Stiles did it in self-defense. He really makes it sound like Stiles took pleasure in killing Donovan. Remember, Scott's big rule is
we don't kill people.
So Scott is very upset to learn this. Later on, Theo lies to Sheriff Stilinski and claims that Theo is the one who killed Donovan in self-defense. And
that left me confused. Why is he telling two different lies? Of course he would lie to Scott because he wants to break Scott and Stiles up. But why doesn't he throw Stiles under the bus to his dad? It's weird, right?
So now that Lydia knows that Parrish is the one stealing the bodies, she uses him to help her find the Nematon, even though they found it 2 seasons ago. And they find the bodies of all the dead chimeras from earlier in the season there as well. And Parrish tells Lydia that,
oh, well, when I'm having my sleepwalking fugue state, when I'm in my dreams, there are actually hundreds of bodies, not just 8.
was this an omen of worse tidings to come? So at the vet clinic, Scott confronts Stiles about killing Donovan, and they have a little friend breakup, and it's really sad. Oh my gosh. And then Hayden's condition is rapidly worsening after that latest injection. So Liam goes to Scott and he says,
please, bite Hayden, turn her into a real werewolf, and then she'll be healed.
But Scott refuses. Scott thinks that Hayden is too weak, and that if he gives her a real bite, she's just going to die. So instead, they take Hayden to the veterinary clinic and they have Melissa, Scott's mom, treat her. And now we're at the last episode. So it opens with this scene of like a rando running from some kind of mysterious giant monster. We don't see the monster, but like we get a sense that it's huge. And I think it like picks up the sign for the high school and throws it through the wall. So like this is a big deal. Lydia does some reading and she discovers that Parrish is a hellhound.
What does that mean? I don't know. I'm not Googling it. Whatever. We'll do it in a different episode.
So Theo gives up all pretenses and goes full evil and shows his true colors to everybody. First, he locks Malia up at the hospital. Malia manages to escape, but she gets attacked by a chimera. And then Brayden shows up to rescue Malia.
We remember Brayden, right? She's like that mercenary who was dating Derek at the end of last season. Well, she's back, but Derek's not back.
Why is Derek gone? And I don't know if somebody hired her, but like she's here and she's like,
Listen up, Malia. Your mom's back. The desert wolf is coming to kill you.
This is the big character arc for next half of the season. At the high school, Theo traps Scott in a mountain ash circle and reveals that he was the first chimera made by the Dread Doctors.
Dun, dun, dun.
They approached him as a child and made him kill his older sister, and then they put her heart in his chest so that he could be like an organ chimera, whatever. And then they made him part werewolf, part coyote. Theo also reveals that he had been slowly poisoning Scott by putting wolfsbane in his inhaler, just like Allison's mom all those years ago. And Theo actually came back with this evil plan to create his own pack. So then Theo makes a dramatic exit and Liam enters. And Liam wants to fight. So this is that other flashback we saw at the beginning of the season of them fighting. Liam wants to kill Scott and become an alpha so that he can give Hayden the bite and save her. And he got this idea from Theo, of course.
Wow. Didn't Peter use this exact same trick on Derek like 7-8 years ago? Is Theo the new Peter now?
Oh, also, like, it's the night of a supermoon when the full moon is also, like, super big and close to Earth. So Liam is already, like, under that pull, and he's angry and stressed because his girlfriend is dying. So, like, he's out of control. And then Scott, number one, is poisoned, and number two, he doesn't want to kill anybody, and he really doesn't want to fight his own beta, so he's at a major disadvantage. And Liam comes seriously close to killing Scott before Mason shows up and says,
Liam, stop. Hayden's already dead. Melissa wasn't able to save her.
So then Liam goes into shock, but then like he also has this moment of clarity and he becomes ashamed of how he was acting and he just runs away.
And it's really sad.
And then as Scott is lying there beginning to heal, Theo returns and he kills Scott himself. Our main character is dead. Theo says that all along he's wanted Scott's pack. He wanted the Banshee. He wanted the Coyote. He wanted the one kid who was briefly a void no Gitsune. But it's not like killing Scott will actually make Theo a real alpha since he's synthetic. He's not like an actual wolf. Oh well, he kills him anyway. But it's okay because Melissa shows up and she does CPR and revives her son. Yay! But Theo goes to Lydia next, and he's able to access her memories to find out where the Nematon is, and he like controls her to lead him to the Nematon. And when they're there with all of the bodies of the chimeras, he has this one syringe from the doctors, and he injects Tracy, the werewolf Kanema girl, Corey, the one kid who was able to turn invisible, Josh, the guy who could eat electricity, and Hayden, the girl who was in love with Liam. He revives the four of them and uses them to form his own pack. afterwards, they set off and Lydia just collapses in a coma after whatever he did to her. And the very last image we're left with is the doctors uncovering this ancient painting depicting a battle between a hellhound and some other creature. And the doctors all look at each other and they say that they have finally had a success. So what I take this to mean, and I mean take this with a grain of salt because I've already watched the next half of the season, one creature in the painting is a hellhound, so the other monster must have been what the doctors were trying to create, their success, that mystery monster from the beginning of this episode. I hope this was fun for you guys. I gotta be honest, season 5 is not my favorite one. Looking back at it, reading the first half and really digging into the text, I appreciate all of the moving parts and like the symbolism of it, especially like Malia dealing with her heritage and the idea that she's more than just her parents. And like in the text, that's fine. But when you really watch the show, it just doesn't have that impact. I don't know. And then the second half of season 5 is where I personally just really lost interest. The whole thing just gets more convoluted. But, I hope at least for this first half, I was able to really show what the stakes were, how we get to where we are, right? Oh well, whatever. Goodbye. See you next week. Thank you for listening to RenFare. I hope you'll join me next time. RenFare is available to listen wherever you find your podcasts. If you like this content and want to hear more, feel free to follow me on Spotify, Anchor.fm, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Radio Free Public, Bullhorn, and several others. RenFare is also uploaded to the From the Margins YouTube channel that I share with my content partner Violet Knight. You can join us there to hear us discuss current events and our own interests. If you feel so inclined, you can join the discussion by becoming a member of our Patreon to support the growing channel. From the Margins with Violet and Connor is also available to stream on the audio platforms I listed above. Please check us out there as well. Until next time.